You develop an iOS app in an Xcode project. So now it's time to fire one up and see what one looks like. To take a look at a project, let's download one of the sample apps from Apple. These are apps you can explore and use as you wish. You can copy interface objects and code and use them in your own projects. To find the sample apps, log in to the iOS Dev Center. If you're an official iOS developer, you'll see the page similar to this one, the iOS Dev Center with resources and downloads. Down here you'll find the sample code link. Click the sample code link and then browse the sample apps. Sample code of any kind is always invaluable. Most good developers look over sample apps before they start building their own. They take something that closely approximates what they want to do and then modify it until it does exactly what they want it to do. Let's sort the sample apps by title and browse through them until we find Hello World. Here it is. Click Hello World to see the information page, and then click the Download Sample Code button. Your browser downloads the project in a zip file to your computer. Open your Downloads folder, or wherever your browser stores the downloaded files, and double-click the Hello World iPhone zip file to extract the folder containing the Hello World iPhone project. You can then open the Hello World iPhone folder and double-click the Hello World Xcode project file right here to launch Xcode. But we're not going to do that yet. Let's show you another way. Another way to launch Xcode is to find the application itself and double-click it. By default, it's downloaded to your internal hard drive and placed in the developer folder at the root level. So open Macintosh HD, or whatever you call your internal hard drive, and open the developer folder. And then, inside the developer folder, open the applications folder. Xcode.app is the application. Before we launch it, here are a couple of hints to make Xcode handier and more efficient. You can drag the icon for the Xcode app all the way down to the Finder's dock, like this, in order to include it in the dock. And when you first launch Xcode, you see a welcome screen. After you use Xcode to create projects, your welcome screen lists all of your most recent projects in the right column. As you can see, I've been looking at all the sample apps recently. However, your welcome screen will probably be empty in this column until you start creating projects and opening them. Now, if you don't want to be bothered with the welcome screen in the future, deselect the Show This Window when Xcode launches checkbox right here. But I prefer to start with this window, so I keep it checked. Before we start, let's get an idea of what the Xcode window looks like. Click the Learn About Using Xcode link on the welcome screen. The Organizer window appears with documentation about Xcode 4. Here you see the main workspace window for Xcode. To develop an iPhone app, you have to work within the context of an Xcode project and workspace. Xcode opens the workspace window for working on multiple Xcode projects and other files that are related. You do most of your work on projects in the workspace window. If you have a nice large monitor, expand the workspace window so that you can see everything in it as big as life. This is, in effect, Command Central for developing your iPhone app. It displays and organizes your projects, source files, and other resources that you need to build your app. So here you see the following: the Navigator area and Navigator selector bar right here. The Navigator area appears on the left side of the workspace window and offers a selector bar for selecting the project, symbol, search, issue, debug, breakpoint, and log navigators. That's 7 navigators: project, symbol, search, issue, debug, breakpoint, and log. Whichever one you click on up here shows up here in the Navigator area. Here you find the Editor area and the Editor panes. The Editor area in the center of the workspace window displays different panes that let you edit many types of information, including source code with the Source Editor and user interface elements with the Interface Builder. They appear right here in the Editor area after you select something in the Navigator area. A jump bar appears on the top of each editor pane to provide an alternate way of navigating through the files and symbols in your project. You can use the jump bar to go directly to items at any level in the workspace. The debug area at the bottom center of the workspace window shows debugging information when you are building and running the app, and the utility area on the right side of the workspace window shows various inspectors and lets you switch those inspectors by clicking the inspector selector icons. I'll show you more about the utility area as we explore the project, look at documentation, and look at the interface builder. The filter bar in the bottom left side of the workspace window offers buttons for adding a new file and for filtering the Project Navigator display so that you show only recently edited files or files with unsaved changes, and so on. With other navigators, such as the Debug Navigator or the Breakpoints Navigator, the filter bar offers buttons for filtering those navigator displays, such as showing only enabled breakpoints. And as you can see, there's a breakpoint gutter for where your breakpoints appear, and a focus ribbon, which we'll be talking about in a minute. Now let's open the Xcode project file for Hello World. We can click the Open Other button on the welcome screen, or we can choose File Open, and then select helloworld.xcodeproj for the project file. The Project Navigator appears when you first create or open a project, or after clicking this folder icon in the Navigator selector bar. You can click other icons in the Navigator selector bar to switch to other navigators, such as the Symbol Navigator, the Search Navigator, the Issues Navigator, the Debug Navigator, the Breakpoints Navigator, and the Log Navigator. But let's go back to the Project Navigator. The Project Navigator shows an outline view of the contents of the Hello World project. You see files named Hello World App Delegate, My View Controller, and so on. You can move files and folders around and add new folders. You may notice that some of the items in the Project Navigator list are folders, where others are just icons. Most have a little triangle, the disclosure triangle, next to them. Clicking the little triangle expands the folder, and clicking it again collapses the folder. Depending on the item you select in the Project Navigator list, an editor pane appears for that item in the editor area. For example, the main window.xib file is selected, and what you see in the editor pane is the main window in the Interface Builder. The Interface Builder fills the editor area, and its inspectors, in this case the Connections Inspector, fills the utility area. Now I will click the project itself, Hello World, at the very top of the Project Navigator to show the project editor in the editor area. Let's also close the utility area by clicking the Hide or Show Utilities button in the View selector here. You can see that the project has a target called Hello World, and it's set to run on the iPhone here in the Devices pop-up menu. Its deployment target is set to 3.2. That's iOS version 3.2. That means this app will run on all versions of iOS going back to version 3.2. Let's look at a few more items. The Tasks button up here, which says Run, actually gives you a number of tasks that you can do. Run, test, profile, or analyze. More often than not, you'll use this button to run the app. The Stop button appears next to it. If an app is running, it's active, so that you can click it to stop execution. So what you do with these two buttons is you click the Run task to build your app, which also compiles the code with any linked code and launches it in the simulator or on the iPhone itself. Next to these two buttons is the Scheme menu. The Scheme menu lets you specify the active SDK and the active configuration, which is called a scheme. I describe schemes later when we get into building and running the app on an actual iPhone instead of the simulator. For now, notice that iPhone 4.3 Simulator is selected as the scheme. That's where we're going to run this app. Next to that is the Breakpoints button, which turns breakpoints on and off. A breakpoint tells Xcode to stop execution of the app at a certain point in the code. We'll get into breakpoints when we talk about debugging. The status pane up here shows messages about your project. For example, when you're building your project, Xcode updates the status bar to show where you are in the process and whether or not the process completed successfully. And as you can see, the last time I ran Hello World, the build was successful and there were no issues. To see how the editor area works and look at some of the code in Hello World, click My View Controller H in the Project Navigator in the left column. The code for that file appears in the source editor on the right in the editor area. It starts off with a very long comment. This here marks the beginning of a comment, and down here marks the end of a comment. That long comment is, of course, Apple's notice about how you can use these sample apps. Scroll further and you'll see the actual code in this file right here. Now, Let's click the middle editor selector button over here in the top right corner to show the assistant editor. You then see myViewController.h, which is the interface header file, which we were just looking at, and you see myViewController.m, the implementation code file on the right side. The right pane is called the Assistant Editor pane, and it automatically shows the related content for whatever you selected in the Project Navigator so that you can edit both easily. Here we see the contents of myViewController.m. You will get used to editing the .h and .m files for your code. The .h file is a header file, and the .m file is an implementation file. If you know anything about Objective-C, you know that you need both a header file to define the class's interface and an implementation file which contains the code for the class. The .h header file also defines instance variables and methods, and the .m implementation file contains the code for those methods. I explain this in more detail as we move into building our own sample app. So you just learned that you can click the middle button for the Assistant Editor. And if you click the left button, which is the standard display, it shows the source editor in a single pane. The button on the right is the version button, which shows the differences between the selected file in one pane and another version of that same file in a second pane. And here on top of the editor pane, you see the jump bar. Although the jump bar's configuration and behavior depends on whatever you've selected, it offers these basic functions. You can click the Related Files menu to see additional selections relevant to the current context, such as recent files that were opened, or the counterpart files, such as the implementation file for the header file. Click the Previous or Next buttons to step back and forth through your navigation history. Click the Hierarchical Path menu, as you see here, Hello World, Classes, myViewController, to switch to a different file. The jump bar shows the same structure you see in the Project Navigator, right down to individual files, and then down to the symbols inside the files. For example, if you click one of the elements in the code, it appears in the jump bar so that you can select it, and other symbols that are related to it. And here's another trick. You can hold down the Option key while displaying a file to show the Assistant Editor automatically. And really, if you have any questions about what any of these things do, just hover the mouse over it and you'll see. Show the standard editor, show the Assistant Editor, show the version editor, and so forth. The first item in the Project Navigator under the readme.txt file is labeled Classes. This is the container that contains the classes used in this project. And these are Objective-C classes. The Other Sources folder includes the main.m file, which is the source code that starts the app, and we'll explain more about this file later. The Resources folder includes graphics and other resource files, and of course the XIB files that define the user interface. When you start with a template in Xcode, you may find these elements organized in different ways. The Hello World app uses this organization. It doesn't really matter as long as all the files are in the project. You can create your own groups or move these files from group to group. Let's explain some of these files. Hello World app delegate.h and Hello World app delegate.m. They contain the code for app-specific behavior that customizes the behavior of a framework object. We do this so that you don't have to subclass the framework object. A behavior-rich framework object is used as is, and it delegates the task of implementing one of its responsibilities to an application delegate for a very specific behavior. So you're therefore using this behavior-rich framework object and adding some behavior to it. I'll explain the delegation pattern of adding behaviors to objects in more detail as we build our sample app. Now, scattered about the classes and resources groups are the main window.xib file, the myViewController.h file, the myViewController.m file, and the Hello World XIB file. These define the interface, and they hold the code that controls the main view, which is also called the Hello World view in this app. In the Other Sources folder, you find the precompiled headers of the frameworks you're using, such as Hello World prefix.pch. You also find main.m, your application's main function. I describe this main.m function later when we build our sample app. The Frameworks folder holds the code libraries. These act a lot like prefab building blocks. The Hello World app uses the UI Kit framework and the Foundation framework. Finally, we come to the Products folder. Let's open that up. Inside, we see one file, helloworld.app, and it's in red. This is not the source code of the app, but rather the compiled version of the app, which means it has been translated from the source code into the object code for the iPhone's processor to execute. At the moment, this file is listed in red because the file can't be found, which makes sense because you haven't done a build and run for this app yet. So always remember, a file name appearing in red lets you know that Xcode can't find the underlying physical file. If you happen to open the Hello World iPhone folder on your Mac, you won't see the folders that appear in the Xcode window. That's because those folders are simply groupings that help organize and find what you're looking for in the Project Navigator. In a real iPhone app project, the list of files can grow pretty large. And when you have a lot of files, you'll have better luck finding things if you create subgroups within the groups, such as the classes or resources groups, or even creating whole new groups. So let's go back to Xcode and see. You can create a new group in the Project Navigator by clicking at the top and then choosing File, New Group. Your new group appears here. You may want to put a file into it. You can just drag it in.